Excited that many of you have taken that opportunity to join us after school. And so we're hoping in this mini session that you can continue to gain knowledge and support our LGBTQ students. So I would like to introduce to you Yuritsa Perez. Yuritsa is the Youth and Training Specialist at the Indiana Youth Group, an organization that creates safe spaces to foster community and empower our LGBTQ youth. Yuritsa has their bachelor's degree in the science in psychology from Purdue University. She has worked with youth of all ages and enjoys spending time with the future leaders of the LGBTQ movement. Outside of work, she enjoys gardening and writing the next American novel. So thank you, Yuritsa. And I am going to be watching for comments and letting people in. But as protocol to our group, if you have a question or comment, if you would put a C or a question mark, I will moderate that because we know that in Zoom, it's easy to talk over people and so forth. So if you have a question or comment, please put a C or a question mark in the comment section. So with that being said, Yuritsa, thank you so much for joining us here in Pike Township. We are excited to hear more about what you can share related to our LGBTQ youth.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that you will allow me to come into your space, and especially if it's after school, that just, it means so much to me that you've given me your time. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, which is the beginning of my presentation. But yes, I'm Yaritza. I use any pronouns with respect. If you haven't heard that before, that's okay. Please feel free to ask questions, and I will be happy to explain that. Let's see if it's gonna let me.
You know what, Yuritsa, why don't you go ahead and explain that for those who are joining us who maybe don't understand what that means?
Yeah, of course. So, pronouns are really just the way that we replace someone's name in a sentence, right? And so we hear, she, her, we hear he, him. But for some people, those pronouns don't really work, right? They don't feel comfortable. They can really bring up a lot of the feelings of like gender dysphoria that we experience, right? As trans people, as gender non-conforming people, as non-binary people. So for me personally, I'm genderqueer. I don't have a gender. And that journey has, it's taken a hot second. I think I've always had moments where I've known throughout my childhood. Like I can remember being very, very little and thinking that I was both a boy and a girl, and trying to explain that to people. And like everyone's like, oh, you're so silly, you're a girl. So and now I know what it is, right? And it took a little bit, but as such, it feels comfortable. And where I feel more comfortable in conversation is when people use all pronouns to talk about me. It's affirming to my gender, right? And it doesn't make me feel like I have to be a woman or present as a woman. So it's very freeing. I also use all pronouns in Spanish since that's my native language. And that's where I experience the most euphoria. So I have a lot of gender euphoria when people use like the gender neutral E in Spanish. And I just never thought I would feel gender euphoria, and then I did, and it's really wonderful. So it's just a way that we can help make sure that we are respecting people and seeing them for who they are. And it's as personal as someone's name, so it's very important that we respect people's pronouns. But we will talk about it in the presentation. So no worries if, we still have some questions, that's okay. So this is gonna be a conversation about gender. And as we have this conversation, I think it's really important to build a vessel so we can all be on the same page with each other. The goal of this is to listen to understand. Our culture is very much about listening to dominate a conversation. And, or listen to, respond or to answer, to fix. And I just want us to be able to sit with the information, sit with the feelings that it might bring up in ourselves, and dig deep, acknowledge like where's these feelings coming from. It's going to be a difficult conversation for some people, and that's okay. I want to acknowledge that. Know that we're challenging ideas, but not people. this is a conversation that comes from a place of love, right? This is a love for my community. This is a love for humanity. And to quote James Baldwin, if I love you, I want to make you conscious to the things that you can't see. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to feel uncomfortable, right? But that's where we have the most growth and our feelings of discomfort. Everyone has learned isms, right? We all live in this culture that has taught us things about people of color, that has taught us things about women, that has taught us things about LGBTQ plus people. The question is, am I racist? Am I homophobic? Am I transphobic? The question is, where is it showing up in my work? How is it affecting the way I give care? So we're all going to do the work of unlearning the isms, and it's going to be the work of the rest of our life. It's not one conversation, it's not one book, it's not one training. It's the work that we do every single day. So making space for that. We really have to acknowledge feelings and be able to label them within ourselves. Our culture does not like emotions, but they're there, and they're valid. So being able to label our feelings and acknowledging the feelings of other people is very vital to this work. The goal is always to create safer spaces. But I can acknowledge that, I can't always guarantee that a space is going to be safe. So please make sure that you're taking care of yourself. If you need to take a break, if you need to stretch, grab a drink, grab a snack, go ahead and do so. And also, if we can make sure that, again, we're being mindful of what things are coming up, right? And maybe now's not the time to focus on it, but maybe you can set that aside and then come back to it. That's how we're going to be able to hold ourselves accountable. So.
All right, thank you. We have a comment from Chad Heck.
Of course.
I just wanted to mention that this is also, when you're talking about pronouns with your class, that's one way that your LGBTQ plus students know that you're a safe person to talk to. I mean, that's a signal to them that you have at least done some of the work in this space. So that's an awesome place to start.
Yeah,
and
the really wonderful things about pronouns is they cost $0. It's 100% free. And that's a really good point. Our community is really great about looking for those clues that show that someone is safe or that a space is safe, right? And that comes from a place of survival. That's how we were able to find each other throughout history. That's where we were able to, be with our community, and there's healing in community, right? There's healing in allies, and knowing that you can go into a space and not have to pretend to be something you're not, that is huge, right? That is absolutely wonderful and vital. But yeah, pronouns are definitely a good way of letting your youth or your kiddos know that you're an ally, right? So what is gender? So this seems like it's such a simple question, right? It seems like, it's very easy, it's very simple to talk about, but it's a little bit more complex than that. We see gender as a gender binary, right? So we have men, we have women, and that's it. And that's really not the case. And what I mean by that is that people have existed outside of our Western ideas of gender, and have always existed and thrived and had places in their community. And people will continue to exist outside of that, right? So gender can be a complex conversation. I always tell people that I can talk about gender for a whole semester. It could be an entire semester's worth of work. And talking about the root of the gender binary being a tool of white supremacy and being able to label that and sit with that. But for our conversation, gender is who you are. It's who you know yourself to be. And it's not about the external, it's not about what people put on you, it's who you are. Nobody knows your gender better than you know your own gender, right? So a lot of times kids become aware of their gender around 3 or 4 years old, right? And what I tell people is that it's not necessarily that they have the language to explain like, oh, I'm trans, I'm genderqueer, I'm gender fluid, but they'll show you in different ways, right? And it's about, are we mindful of that? Can we listen to that and acknowledge that? Because a lot of times that is really just a shift in like clothing and hair. And that's, you know, all that kids are really asking for. But yeah, we start to be conscious of ourselves as like a human being that experiences the world around like 3 or 4. So yeah. As much as we would like to say that, you know, I'm a parent, I'm a guardian, a caregiver, a trusted adult in someone's life, you can't see inside of a kid's head to like be like, oh, look, it's right there, there's their gender. So being able to listen to them and honoring what they say is vital. So when we have this conversation, I want to make sure that we're having this conversation from a place that makes sense. So whenever I talk about this, I always talk about gender versus sex assigned at birth. We have this idea, a lot of times you're here biological sex, and we're gonna throw it away. I said we weren't gonna throw away people, and we're not. We're throwing away terms that cause harm, because the idea of biological sex is seen as like obsolete. It's seen as like true perfect science, and it's not. You know, it's a word and it's a term that people use to hide their transphobia behind, right? What actually happens is like a doctor looks at a baby and based off of anatomy makes a call. And that isn't binary. That isn't just a boy or a girl. There's people that are intersex. And, you know, so right off the bat, it's not binary. But also humans are really complex. You know, we have chromosomes and hormones, and so how can we make that into like a single category and a neat little like, well, for someone to be a man, they have to have these chromosomes and these hormones expressions, because there's also receptors. It's complex. A lot of biologists actually say that there's as many genders as there are people, because humans are too unique to try to put in those categories, right? And again, just trying to move away from the idea of like biological sex, because it's inconsistent with the science that we have. And it pushes this and reinforces this idea that things are natural, innate, and unchanging. And, you know, again, this comes from a place of white supremacy. And we can talk about that, I promise. But so when I say cisgender, what am I saying? So again, going back to the baby that's born, a doctor is going to look and, you know, make a call. And as this kiddo grows up and, you know, it's like, oh, hey, like that feels good. Like, that's who I am. That's who I know myself to be. You know, I like the name that was given to me, the pronouns associated. You're cisgender. It just means that you're not trans. It's not a bad word. For some reason, people say that it's a slur. It's not. It just means you're not transgender. There's nothing wrong with that. So people who are trans, baby, doctor scenario, right? And as they grow up, as they start to, you know, they get to that age, they, you know, 3 or 4, and they start to kind of experience the world, that doesn't work for them. It doesn't fit. The example I use for this, there was a kiddo at the place at the school I worked at, right? And we would line up in 2 lines, a boys line and a girls line. I didn't like that, but you know, I didn't really have a say. Also, I was very much in the closet, so I wasn't trying to out myself. It wasn't very safe. Anyway, that's not the point. This kiddo absolutely hated lining up in the girls line, and they would always get into the boys line. And, you know, kids try to help each other, so they would try to get them to go to the girls line. And they were so anxious about that. So I was like, we can't do this. We have to line up in a different way. Like, we absolutely cannot, you know, put them through that pressure and that anxiety, and there's no reason for it. So we ended up switching out the ways we did lines. So it wasn't gendered needlessly. So without, you know, I don't know how that youth will identify. I don't know the language that they will use to describe themselves, but it doesn't matter. In that moment, that scenario, I could see their discomfort, and there was no way that I was going to put them through that anxiety, right? Schools are safe places. They should be, at least. We can't control what goes on in the home, but we can provide safe spaces for our youth as much as possible. So being trans means different things for different people. There's no single way to be trans. There's no single transgender experience. There's no single, like, everyone always says the surgery. There's no the surgery. There's like 14 different procedures, and guess what? Some people don't have any of them. On one hand, because they might not want to, and that's okay. Their body and their experience is valid. And on the other hand, there's a lot of barriers to that. So it's very difficult to access, medical procedures, right? Because it's finding doctors that will actually listen to you. And if you have that, do you have the insurance to cover things? And is insurance going to cover it? Because, insurance, it can be very difficult just by itself. So for people, they might just not have the ability to have access to the medical care that they want. So non-binary is an umbrella term that is pretty much people who don't fit the gender binary of a man or a woman, right? So it's people that are, gender queer, gender fluid, agender, they don't have a gender. And again, all of this is just modern language for experiences that have always existed. There's no single way to be non-binary. People can look all sorts of ways and still be non-binary. And I think a lot of times, any representation that we have in media, it's very much, androgynous, thin, white, able-bodied, and it does us a disservice because we start seeing this as a different category, right? We start seeing it as, okay, gender isn't a binary, it's a trinary, and I don't think that's a word, but like we see it in like 3 distinct boxes. Instead of like, hey, maybe instead of distinct box, it's kind of, all over the place. It's a spectrum. It's, it's an entire universe of possibilities. And just making space for that, making space to hear people's experience. So I talked about intersex when I talked about the baby, but basically it's a term created to describe people's whose like genitalia doesn't look the way that medical professionals expect it to, or their internal genitalia doesn't match what like the medical field says should match their external genitalia, right? So either people are intersex when they're babies, right, from the get-go, or as they grow up, as they hit puberty, things don't happen, right? They're supposed to have, menstruation, for example, and that doesn't happen. So then they actually like look into it and, oh, they're intersex. It's really important to note that trans people and intersex people are asking for the exact same thing, bodily autonomy. Just being able to trust that they know what's best for them. Right? And it's something so simple, but the truth of the matter is a lot of times when kiddos are diagnosed or like labeled intersex, there's a lot of conversation about the community in terms of like that medical diagnosis, but we can talk about it. We might not have time. But anyway, when kiddos are labeled intersex, they have surgeries when they're babies and toddlers to correct the anatomy. And intersex people and intersex advocates are like, hey, like maybe we should wait until we grow up to a point where we're like, oh, I would like some surgery, or I feel comfortable with myself, right? So, and trans people are like, listen to us, like we are the experts of our own experience. If I could leave you with anything, it's that, like letting people and trusting that people are the experts of their own experience and listening to that. So yeah, bodily autonomy is something that they're both asking for. So I love the gender unicorn, and yeah, a big part of it is because it's a unicorn and I like unicorns. But it also, like, this can be a lot. This can be a little overwhelming, and that's okay. We're all learning. So this is a really great way to break it down, and it's very simple, right? So gender identity, it's who you are. It's who you know yourself. Gender expression is the things that you wear, right? So, you know, one of the examples I do is like everyone has a gender expression, right? You could be a cisgendered woman. Oh, I don't really like makeup, or oh, I really don't like, you know, heels. So, you know, that's your expression. It gives space for sex assigned at birth. And then it talks about, you know, that's versus sexual attraction, which is not the same thing. I really like this because sometimes especially when I'm working with parents, they have a lot of questions, and they have questions, but they don't even know like the language to use, and that's okay. We all start somewhere. So I can bust out the gender unicorn, and I mean, if I feel comfortable, I can like break down myself on it. So they have an idea of like what we're talking about. And then again, it's a unicorn, so it's super cute. But there's also the genderbread person. I will say this, and I can share these resources with Dr. Flora for everyone. They also have the gender unicorn in different languages, and it's very accurate in Spanish. I can't speak for the other languages. So it's a really valuable resource, and it's created by trans students. So it's really great. So we're gonna talk, like I said, a little bit about pronouns. We all know pronouns. I'm pretty sure we learned them in like 3rd grade, right? They're just a way that we replace someone's name, right? So if I'm like, hey, this is my friend Bob. Bob's favorite color is green. Bob is a mechanic. Bob has a turtle. Like that can get a little like, you know, overwhelming. Or I can just say, this is my friend Bob. He has a turtle. He's a mechanic. His favorite color is green. He's a Cancer, Scorpio rising, you know, whatever. I can, you know, we're talking about Bob, just a way of replacing it. We are again are told that she, her, he, him are like the only pronouns, but that's not true, because we always use they, them, theirs as a singular pronoun. It's only a problem when, you know, trans people ask for it, but we've always used it, right? If you get in a lift and you're, you know, you notice that someone left their phone there, you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, someone left their phone. I hope they, you know, I hope they find it. I hope that we can take it to a lost and found. You know, that phone belongs to one person. It doesn't belong to a group. It belongs to a person. You just don't know who that person is. So just very naturally, we use they, them, theirs singularly. And we've been doing that for a long time. A lot of times people are like, oh my gosh, everyone's sensitive now. No, Shakespeare used to do this all the time. And nobody questioned his use of they, them, theirs as a singular pronoun. So I'm just saying. Beyond that, it's just important to note that language evolves. It has to. It's always evolved. And it just evolves to meet the needs of its speakers. And it's what we use to better communicate. There's a reason why the English that we speak is different from the English that people in the UK speak. And it's different from, you know, the Queen's English so long ago. It has always evolved. If we're not upset about that no one's saying like thou anymore, but we're upset about pronouns, like we need to be able to check in with ourselves and acknowledge that that's coming from a place of transphobia. So this is also another really wonderful resource. It's not all the pronouns, but it's some of them, and it helps people, you know, practice them, right? Because we are all human beings, and we do need a little bit of practice. My biggest thing is always pronunciation. I don't want to mispronounce something, so I practice pronunciation a lot. But so this is another really great resource that I'll share that just helps us break it down, and we need a little bit of help with that, right? And another thing is, you know, you'll hear a lot of youth using neopronouns. And again, that's valid. I think it should be celebrated that we're finding new ways to communicate with each other and to honor ourselves. It's wonderful, it's incredible. And I will always encourage people to find the best ways to talk about themselves, right? Gender dysphoria is heavy. It is hard. You don't even feel comfortable in your own body, in your own experience. Whatever we can do to help each other with that, help ourselves with that, you know, I think it's important to ask for that. So I will
take a quick pause before you start to see if anybody had any questions. You know, if you put something in the comments, I'll stop there. or if anybody had anything to share from maybe experience in the classroom or with members of your family, your own children that you would like to share before we move on. I know that Yuritsa probably gets what I get sometimes, and after a while you feel like you're not talking to anybody. So Katie Ray, let's, what would you like to share?
Hi there. I'll turn my camera on. I have seen more and more people use like he/they or she/they when they introduce themselves with pronouns. And I am not sure what that means. Like, is that I just don't know what it means. And I would love some clarification on that.
That's a really good question. Thank you so much for asking that. So, I can't speak for everyone, but usually with the people that I know, the wonderful, amazing friend group that I'm blessed with, when we share multiple pronouns, what we're asking for is to mix it up, right? So not a lot of times what happens is when our friends are, one of the very first friend in our group that came out as non-binary in high school, all those years ago, it's been forever now. The thing he said was he wants to use he, him pronouns and then they, them, theirs, right? And, that was really hard for them. It was very difficult. Honestly, they lost some friends with that. And, he really wanted to explain it to us, but people were on different journeys of like understanding gender, and that's valid. But one of the things that I talked to with my best friend was like, it was really awkward because they were so brave and they shared that with us, and yet no one was using they, them, theirs to refer to them, right? They were always using he, him. And he said that that was a good pronoun for him, so that's they're not wrong, but they also mentioned they, them, theirs. So what we do and what I do, and so when I see that, I default to switching it up. And it's not impossible. It does take a little bit of practice, and there's no shame in that. We all have to practice that, especially if it's someone in your life that you've grown up with. You're so used to seeing them as who you're used to seeing them as, and it's going to take us a little bit of practice, and that's okay. Making space for that is important. But thank you for that question.
Okay, we're ready to go.
So what happens when you say the wrong pronoun? Again, this is going to happen because you're a human being and we all make mistakes. The best thing to do is to correct yourself and move on. A lot of times people will be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. It's just so hard for me. I don't understand. This is just new. And they'll make it this huge thing. And then the person feels like they have to make you feel better. It's just easier if we, keep the conversation moving, right? If someone else makes a mistake, it's important to correct them, but it doesn't have to be this thing where you're like, oh my gosh, you're a terrible person, because they're not. They're also human beings that are trying to do the exact same thing we are. So, if you could very gently say what they said with the correct pronoun, and yeah, I'm sure if we made a mistake, we would want someone to correct us in a gentle way, right? To call us into a conversation, and keep it moving. Honestly, I've never had a bad experience with very gently correcting someone. Usually I get thanked. Again, our culture has taught us that we can just look at people and know if they're a man or a woman, and that's the only options that we have. And that's not true, right? People can look all sorts of ways. So don't assume someone's pronouns. When I don't know someone's pronouns, I default to they, them, theirs as gender neutral. And then when they share their pronouns with me, I can use their correct pronouns, right? It's also important to note we are really moving away from this idea of preferred pronouns because, again, when language doesn't serve us anymore, we can move away from it. Because this idea of preferred makes people think that you get to opt in to someone's pronouns, right? So you get to choose if you use them or not, and that's just not the case, right? For example, I have a gluten intolerance. I can't eat gluten. That's not a preference. I prefer spicy food, but I can eat all the food. But I cannot eat gluten. It's not going to be a fun week for me, right? So being able to acknowledge that someone's pronouns are their correct pronouns, not preferred. I see that there's a hand raised.
Yes, Sandy, would you, you can go ahead and speak.
Yes, I actually talked to my daughter about this, and I just struggle with the sound of it grammatically in my ears. So she told me honestly that most of the time they would rather just be called by their names then. So what I do, because I'm afraid I will use the wrong pronoun, is I will just use their name. And yes, it might be uncomfortable saying it over and over again, but that, you know, it just makes it easier for me not to forget sometimes.
Yeah, and that's actually like a really interesting point. I know some teachers that their students are, you know, use different pronouns, but they're not out at home. So they're out in the classroom or they're out at school, and you know, that's a very delicate subject, right?
Yeah.
And I always say like default on honoring your children and your kids and your youth, right? Our community has very high rates of suicide and very high rates of self-harm. The journey that their parents, their guardians, their caregivers have to go on is one that they'll do by themselves. And we can't see into the future, know exactly how it's going to look. I believe in people's ability to grow, right? But that's not the responsibility of their kid. That should never be on the youth. They should get to be young and, you know, express themselves and, you know, find themselves with whatever time that takes them, right? But my point to this, to wrap up my points, because I go on so many bunny trails, y'all, I'm sorry. So I have some, you know, teacher friends that get really worried that they don't want to out their students to parents when they're calling them, right? So that's one of their tricks. When they're talking on the phone with parents, they just say the youth's name. So they won't use the wrong, you know, pronoun or a pronoun that the parent doesn't know. So it's interesting that you pointed it out, because that's what I was thinking of. You know, if someone corrects you, I think that sometimes we fall into this like shame spiral, right? This, you know, like, oh my gosh, I did something wrong, I'm a bad person, like, you know, we just keep going into it, right? And instead of it, if we can reframe this, and they're calling you into a conversation, right? They're correcting you again from a place of love. If I'm experiencing, you know, racism, or if someone's being transphobic, if I don't want to go into that conversation with someone, I'll just, you know, finish the conversation and we never talk about it. But you call in the people that you care about and you want to have a conversation with. And I see that there's another hand, Tandy.
I just wanted to share a personal experience. My child is currently 19, but in 5th, 6th grade, I got a phone call from their school that they were self-harming. And that was the first indication to us that something was going on. But it took till middle school till they came out and started talking to us about identifying as non-binary. But since then, we've been able to have very open conversations, and I've learned a lot. So I want to say thank you for sharing this information with us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me and for listening to your kid. That's so vital. I think that, you know, coming out is such a scary thing, and we never know how the people around us will react. So yeah, it's hard, and we're constantly coming out. It's not just a one-time thing. It happens again and again and again. And we're put into situations where we might have to out ourselves, you know, for example, you know, insurance, right? If they ask about like a spouse, or, you know, if you're visiting your doctor, you know, we're constantly being put in a situation where we might be unsafe. So being able to listen to people and listen to what they share with you, even if you don't fully understand, that is so vital and so necessary, and it's life-saving. So thank you. So my favorite way of using pronouns is introducing yourself with pronouns, right? So especially if you're in a space like in a big meeting or a town hall or anything, and people usually introduce themselves with like name, their occupation, and then a fun fact. If no one else used pronouns, go ahead and introduce yourself with pronouns, right? You're gonna do one of two things. One, you're gonna let the people in the room know, any people that use they, them, theirs, or other pronouns, you're gonna let them know that you're safe. You're a person that they can be safe with. Also, you're a person that they don't have to, misgender themselves with you, right? You're going to honor them for who they are. And isn't that the goal of, humanity, to be able to see each other as humans and care about each other as such? So you're going to be very, it's going to be a very quick, easy way to affirm someone, right? Or you're going to start a conversation because people will be like, oh, I don't know what that means. Like, what is that? And then you can be like, hey, that's a great question. Let's talk about pronouns and talk about the ways that, the cultural push of gender binary and how that's just inaccurate, and why it's so important to normalize asking people for their pronouns and sharing them. So a big part of this work, pronouns are a start, right? But it's also, it's going to require us to shift the ways that we use language, the gendered language that we use. Cis heteronormative assumptions, like assuming that someone is going to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a wife or a husband, when we can just say spouse or partner, right? It's also going to ask that we start to look at the world in different ways. Not as, if you're going to tell a story about a stranger that you saw on the bus with pink hair, I don't know their gender. So I'm going to be like, hey, there was this person with pink hair and their hair was so fabulous. And I spent the rest of my bus ride thinking of how much I wanted to bleach my hair and dye it pink. No gender, because I don't know. All I know is their hair was awesome, right? It's going to take all of us to have conversations with ourselves and the people around us to do this work. Last year was the deadliest year for trans people in the US. We lost 44 trans people, and it's April. We're literally in April, 4 months into the year, and there's been 13 trans people that have been murdered. And the majority of them are Black trans women. So our house is on fire. I need your help in putting it out. Ask me questions on the way as with our buckets, but like we need everyone to step up and have these conversations. And I just want to let you know, if you're sitting here thinking like, well, I don't understand it, it's okay. I don't understand quantum physics. I'm not really sure that I understand how taxes work, even though I do them every year. It's very confusing. I don't understand it. I know that they still exist and I don't have to understand it. There's experts out there. I'm not asking you to understand what it's like to be trans. I'm asking you to make space for us, to show up with compassion, because at the end of the day, we're all just humans on a floating rock trying our best. So that is it for my presentation. I wanted to make room for like questions and comments, but thank you all so very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, comments, concerns.
Chad Heck has a comment.
Sure. I think one thing that I see a lot with trans students that really impacts them are teachers using their what's called their dead name. And I just want to like share that term with everyone else as well. It's the name that they may have been given when they were born or maybe on their legal documents, but that's not a name they use any longer. And I just want to encourage my colleagues to really not use that dead name and try to protect that name from getting out to other students in the class, because the other students may not know that person's trans. And we're working on this as a district too. I think there's a plan for next year that students will, their legal name may not show up in some of our places like Canvas or in their email. So we're making some great strides in this area, but I want to encourage my colleagues to really protect your students with the names that it may be their legal name, but that's not the name that they choose to use.
Yeah, and I'd just like to piggyback on that because Chad is correct. You know, we have dueling things happening in the midst of this pandemic, right? And so we're working really hard to help eliminate some of the, to make sure that some of those dead names don't show up, while simultaneously especially like in Zoom and stuff, we were having kids changing their names and putting the name of someone else in their class and then doing something inappropriate and then their name's there. And so we've been really working hard to try to come up with a solution on when the data is pulled by the student's name on their birth certificate, but that name might be dead, because we know that we don't want to, for students who do not wish for people to know that name. Or are uncomfortable because people find that out, that we try really hard to protect that, but we get some bumps along the way that we're still trying to work out, but definitely something that we have to continuously keep on our radar.
May I share a quick story though? When I was working at New Augusta North, we did have a situation where a child was being asked to be called by a certain name and the parents were against it. So what do you do in that situation? Especially like with younger kids, I would imagine that would be much more difficult.
Yeah, and that has come up, and the bottom line, when push comes to shove, it's a child is under 18. And so that's where we want to be able to help provide support, whether it's through our counselors or our social workers. But, in the end, a parent is the child's guardian.
That is, yeah, that's always a difficult conversation. And it happens, right? We definitely have a lot of times we'll get asked what we do in the situation. And I always say sometimes we have to get into good trouble, right? Because like y'all, our rates of suicide are through the roof. Mm-hmm. And every single year they just get higher and higher. And there's more visibility, but visibility is a double-edged sword, because as we're more out and in public and in the media, the hate that comes after us gets stronger and stronger. And we see that in the legislation that has been introduced again and again and again to try to control trans youth and our trans bodies. And it's not about bathrooms and it's not about sports. Mm-hmm. It is all about erasing our existence and making it so hard to be trans that we don't even survive into adulthood. It's about controlling trans kids and their ability to exist. So I had a teacher that was like, hey, this kiddo wants to use this name. Should I get parents' permission? And I was like, okay, but like, let's say you have a kiddo named Benjamin. And he's like, can you call me Benny? You would just call him Benny, right? You would just be like, oh, it's Benny. You would do the thing where you write that Benny on top of, Benjamin in the roster. Any sort of subs that came in would know Benny when they're taking attendance, right? You wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, let me consult the lawyers. Let me look at the school policy. We would just listen to this kiddo and call him Benny. But for some reason, when our kiddos are asking for a name that doesn't fit the sex that they were assigned at birth, that's when we're like, oh, we have to make sure that we talk to the lawyers of the school or the policies. And, why would you treat it any differently than you would a kiddo's nickname? And can we honor that in ways to make sure that the kiddos know that they're safe with us? Again, we can't control what happens in their home life. But can we give them a reprieve of that? Can we make our space a little safer? And again, you also probably can't control what other teachers do or think or say, but you can make your classroom a place where they can just be who they are. And I will say this, when kids have one adult, that's all it takes, one adult in their life that is affirming to their gender, uses their pronoun, uses their correct name and not their dead name, the rates of suicide decreased by 50%. It just takes one adult that's there for them. So
The statistics I have, Maritza, are 40% of transgender youth have tried to at least once commit suicide.
that sounds about accurate. And I will say that when you look at any statistics for our community, know that it's always higher for trans youth of color.
So we have a comment from Ruby Butler.
Hi, nice to see you again, Yaritza. And I just want to say thank you. She's been to our school a couple of times and it has been fabulous. And we've been having some courageous conversations and I appreciate that. And one of the things I just kind of wanted to piggyback on some of the things that have already been said is I simply just asked myself since our last time we talked, Yaritza, I just asked myself, because I'm growing in this area. And I asked myself, I said, self, Ruby, what would, how would you feel, if someone kept referring to you as he? You know what I'm just being, and the first thing I said, well, I would, first time I would give the benefit of the doubt. The second time I would, politely correct. And then the third time, if they kept doing it, we would have a problem. And, and I feel like our young people don't always feel that way empowered. And I wanted to share with you a story, Yaritza, just so that you know. I did have a teacher reach out to me and they said for the first time, now this is a veteran teacher, has been teaching a long time, and I'm in middle school for those that do not know. So sometimes we wonder when is the right time to start having these conversations. And it's kind of like when it comes up, I guess it's when you have it, whenever that comes up. And so this teacher told me, they said for the first time, he was adamant. He says, I'm only gonna call the child by the name that's on my roster, period. That's how I think. Whatever's on the roster, that's what we're gonna go by. And he said for the first time, he allowed that child to change their name. And he said even through the Zoom, that was the first time the child opened up and had a real conversation and participated in class. I'm done. I mean, if we can move the needle just that much, kids should be called by what they want to be called. It's simple.
Katie, you had a question or a comment?
Yes. So I teach at the elementary level, and I am looking for any ideas anyone may have about how to reduce the binary at the elementary level. I know the first step, and this has happened because of COVID, we don't use boy line, girl lines anymore. We just use alphabetical order, which makes perfect sense. And it's way easier when they switch teachers anyway. So after we've taken that step, like the most basic, no more boys line, girls lines, what's the next step after that?
That's a really great question. It's in the books that you're reading to the kiddos. It's in the conversations that you have. We used to watch Sesame Street as the kiddos were coming in and we were grading homework. And there was this one time where they had this ballerina and a danseur. I'm probably butchering that, but I don't speak French. They were dancing with giant letters to say the alphabet. And a bunch of the kids were like, oh, guys can't be ballerinas. And I'm like, yeah, they can. They can. Anyone can dance. We can all dance, right? I think they're called danseurs though. And they were like, oh. And they're like, why aren't they called ballerinos? I'm like, I don't actually know, but I can look it up because I've never, I don't do well with any sort of sports or coordination. I will trip if I stand too long. But they were just like, they're ballerinos. So then they just started dancing. And it was just so freaking cute because we had all these kids that are like, I'm gonna be a ballerina, I'm gonna be a ballerino. It was just like I shone a light on this idea that they could dance and that was okay and it should be celebrated. And it's like, yeah, it's in, when you hear the conversations that come up like, oh, girls like pink, or, pink is a girl's color, it's for everyone. It's a color for everyone. It's little things. You're introducing to them a concept that they might not hear at home. or they might not have the language to. And, I think a lot of people have this fear that, they immediately they're like, gender is, anatomy. And that's not, again, that's really not it. Gender is like who you are and the things you like to wear and the ways you express yourself. And there's a lot of really great literature that's, age appropriate, but is a good way to, you start having these conversations.
Dr. Mullen?
We're channeling each other, I think, Yuritsa. So I'm a librarian at College Park, which is elementary. And have you seen this book, From the Fish in the,
I haven't seen
From the
that
Stars in the Sky to the Fish in the Sea? Have you seen it?
Not yet.
It's from a really small Canadian press. I'm going to put a link to IndieBound in the chat, which is an independent bookstore site rather than the big one. But you can see a description of it there. And first of all, it's written with they and their. And one of the descriptors is that it's a child who's having trouble at school because they aren't quite sure who they identify as. But this is a picture book, and it's in our library collection. And so you can see as a picture book, it's simple text and a complex and important story, but it starts conversations. So I was sharing it with someone yesterday. It literally brought them to tears. And then they shared it with their sibling who took it home and was able to use it with nieces and nephews to start a conversation in a family. So at the elementary, one of the things that we can do is be courageous with our book selection. And fortunately, one of the scarier laws in the legislation did not seem to make it through. But there are lots of picture books that are age appropriate and that don't get into, like you said, I mean, that are age appropriate for elementary, but can just open the door for conversations and show a safe place.
Yeah, I want to make a comment simply, even about early on and the way we may assign certain tasks to gender. We see that go through the school across grade levels when we even to the point where girls may not feel they're good at math. Or if you look at our Career Center, the vast majority, if not all, of the students in our CNA program are female. And so it just so many things that we attribute to this gender or that gender. It's almost as when students grow up, then they're like, well, I can't do that. That's for other people. It's like we talked earlier, it also has to do with what we do in all aspects of equity. And so it's helping people see what they can do, no matter their race, no matter their disability, no matter their gender identity. It's about helping people have opportunities to do things that we may not, or they may not know on their own, to give them the chance to have all options available as they go through the grades, and not ones that are targeted into categories of gender.
That's such a good point. Sorry, I'll let you go ahead.
Chad?
I was also gonna say, oh, I'm sorry. I was also gonna say, we often assign tasks like, who can help me carry this box to the cafeteria?
Yes.
Or
Yep.
who can, I don't know. So we often gender those. And then I put a comment in the chat about girl books and boy books. And then I saw Tandy talk about Rick Riordan, but I'll stop.
Chad?
Sure. And I don't want to talk a lot either. I feel like I've talked so many times, but one thing I will share about my practice is that I thought I was doing a really good job at meeting my LGBTQ students' needs in the library. But when I talked to my students, they didn't know those resources were there because I never talked about them. And we can't be afraid to like say those words that we have. And And I need to treat those materials just like I treat every other material. And when I'm book talking those books, say, hey, this is a story about a gay fan, like a kid with two dads, or like I need to be able to talk about that with the students, or else they don't know that they're there in the collection. So it broke my heart one day when, and I'm one of the faculty sponsors of our Gender Sexuality Alliance at the high school, but it broke my heart when those kids told me that we didn't have books that represented them in the library. And my response was, yes, we do have those books, and here they are, and let me show them. And they had gone all of that time thinking we didn't have those books, but I hadn't bothered to tell them. I need to, and that was on me. I need to make sure I say those words and tell them this is where those books are, and tell all students that this is where those books are that are representative, or materials or curriculum or whatever you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. That is so vital. I was gonna say that, you know, within the community, we talk about all the signs that were there before we like had the realization, or before we even really, you know, basically came out to ourselves, right? And for me, like one of the things that I talk about is like, I can't believe it took me so long to see it, because all the signs were there, right? And one of the things that I would get so frustrated with is when teachers were like, oh, I need a big, strong boy. And like, I have no upper body strength, but I would always volunteer to go pick up whatever box or whatever. I would get all the chairs I could physically carry, because there was no way that it was gonna be a big, strong boy. And it's like, the signs were always there. I didn't put 2 and 2 together, but that happened with time, and it needed the time. But yeah, I think that's really vital, especially when we're talking about, like, I have a lot of conversations with the Indianapolis Public Libraries about, you know, books and making sure they're representative of our communities. And, you know, we don't have to wait till June for Pride to share LGBTQ plus books. We can, you know, highlight them year round. You know, humans are a whole human, so we have multiple marginalized experiences. So yeah, we can highlight stories of LGBTQ plus people, people of color, people with disabilities, all throughout the year.
Well, I am going to put a end to this wonderful conversation, because we've only made this 1 hour commitment, and we wanted to make it quick for people to just start to get a better understanding and share ideas. But thank you so much, Aritza. We really, really appreciate your willingness to share information. For those who were speaking, willingness to speak and bring this topic to light, and be open about discussing it. Our Equity Council is looking at some strategic initiatives related to our LGBTQ youth. One being, for example, that we talked about prior to this particular year, is to put something on, for example, the nameplate of teachers by their doors, for example, like maybe a small rainbow or something, so that students know that this is a safe place to go and talk should they have questions. And so thank you so much for enlightening us, and I look forward to ongoing conversation. For those of you who are not aware, Chris Paulson, who is the CEO of Indiana Youth Group, is on our council. So we are very pleased that we have that representation as well. So I want to thank everybody. Have a great rest of the day. And I look forward to anybody who wishes to join next week. I'm going to be talking about championing equity. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.